Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World, where every word matters. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this exclusive interview. European leaders gathered at a UK summit to discuss migration and the situation in Ukraine amidst growing concern about the direction of the United States. The announcement of Vance as Trump's running mate for the 2024 presidential elections has intensified discussions on its potential impact on the EU and Central and Eastern Europe region. Now, with Trump leading the polls, the prospect of his return to the presidency is becoming more plausible. Joining us on TVP World to discuss the implications of a possible Trump administration for Europe and its leaders is Professor Maciej Kisiłowski, Associate Professor at Central European University. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning.
First of all, thanks for being with us here in the studio to dissect this discussion, because now we're trying to speculate how EU leaders will be able to cooperate with MAGA Republicans if Trump takes office. How do you think that might change the dynamics between the United States and Europe?
Well, this is going to be a transatlantic earthquake on January 21st if Trump and Vance do indeed win. I mean, this is not going to be the Trump administration of 2016, because we often forget that when Trump started in office, he was surrounded by very mainstream, respectable figures. Jim Mattis was Secretary of Defense, four-star general. John Kelly was Chief of Staff. Rex Tillerson, experienced executive, was Secretary of State. So these were conservative but mainstream figures. Now you have a 39-year-old, inexperienced J.D. Vance instead of, the former governor of big state Indiana, Mike Pence, who was the vice president in the previous administration. As we know, he was not radical enough for Trump, and that's why they fell apart. So I think that the J.D. Vance nomination is a sign that Trump is going to surround himself with very radical yes men, and this is going to be very difficult for Europe, because their views are just so out of what we expect from America as an ally. And the speech of Donald Trump that just concluded shortly before we went on air in the US confirms that. We have the only foreign leader that was mentioned in this long and rambling speech was Viktor Orban. I mean, this is almost unimaginable a few years or decades ago. Yes, from a mainstream presidential candidate, you don't mention France, Germany, traditional allies, UK even. You mention, a tiny country which is widely condemned, the government of which is widely condemned for creating basically soft authoritarianism within the EU borders, and that's one person that Donald Trump picks and praises as a role model. This is going to be a totally different game.
Is there an argument to be made that perhaps with Viktor Orban being one of the politicians who actually went and visited him is the reason why he brought it up, instead of the German leaders, French leaders who actually didn't really have any communication or just outright condemn him?
Well, I don't think it's like Donald Trump's walking memory that can only recall somebody who visits him. Yes, I mean, I think there is a deeper reason why there is this alliance, as Politico yesterday reported. There is a growing section of these MAGA Republicans, including J.D. Vance, that look at Orban as kind of a white nationalist paradise, yes, where, supposedly free of migration, although those of us who visit Budapest know that economic reality is kind of like in Poland under the far-right government before 2023. Despite that kind of racist rhetoric, the realities are that immigration is continuing, also migration from outside the EU in Hungary, but the narratives, the ambition of totally repudiating what Viktor Orban calls liberal democracy and replacing it with so-called illiberal democracy, which is in many ways contradiction in terms. I think it's animating this radical wing of the Republican Party that it is possible to literally turn back the clock and to create a world without the kind of human rights, rule of law constraints that we take for granted now in the West. And I think the first Trump administration was a lot about frustration that the established institutions of American democracy were kind of preventing them from going full speed towards this kind of white nationalist dream. And I think Viktor Orban shows them that it is possible, in a very small scale, in a country, post-communist country, without much of institutional democratic tradition. But nonetheless, it's a working example in their mind that that this is possible. There are some far-right conservatives who literally almost relocated to Hungary in recent years to kind of observe this dystopian experiment firsthand. So I don't think this is a coincidence. I think Orban is playing a very important outsized role for the size of and importance of his country in this far-right movement.
Sure, there's no debate that Trump and Orban align on a lot of the issues. For example, the immigration issue and a more perhaps isolationist kind of ideology. And we can also see that from one of the popular commentators, Tucker Carlson, who also mentioned that supporting for Ukraine is actually sticking a middle finger to the United States. We actually have a footage of that soundbite, so let's take a look. Do we have it? All right, so our team is still scrambling for that, but yeah, like we mentioned, this is kind of the rhetoric, like we mentioned, is being brought up a lot, and perhaps that's one reason why Orban was the one that was brought up during his speech. So now we do have the footage. Let's take a look.
You don't see our commander-in-chief suggesting that we use our military to protect our country or the lives of its citizens. No, that's for Ukraine. And it's too much, actually. It's too insulting. It's too insulting. It's a middle finger in the face of every American. It's a very clear statement, which is unmistakable. And that is, we don't care about you.
So this brings us to the question. Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, he's traditionally been very critical for the aid in Ukraine. He pretty much echoes the same sentiment as we saw in that video. Should Europe be concerned about the stance?
Well, of course. By the way, Tucker Carlson was the so-called journalist who interviewed Vladimir Putin recently, sure, as in a laughably softball interview that he conducted in Moscow. But yes, Europe must be very concerned because this is going to be a sea change, as I mentioned. The values are not aligning. Ukraine's situation will be desperate. We saw how much of a problem and existential threat to Ukraine was when the US Congress delayed the military aid for just 6 months. And I think with these people in power, you can expect that there will be no more aid to Ukraine. And so this is going to be a completely different geopolitical game. And Europe, whether we like it or not, will need to have some working relation with the Trump administration. And the question is, who's gonna have this relation? Because we just elected the new leadership of the European Union. Ursula von der Leyen actually won handily, great result, 400 votes. Kaja Kallas, Antonio Costa. These are very competent people, but they are really, this is a theme for ordinary times, for ordinary workings in the transatlantic world that we have known for decades. Now the question is whether, you know, an Estonian former prime minister who is famously hawkish, extremely hawkish, as Estonians generally are, taught by their historical experience about Russia, how is she going to talk and connect with, you know, the 39-year-old potential future vice president who says, I don't care what happens with Ukraine one way or another. Right. I mean, this is going to be, you know, like aliens from different planets talking to each other. And the question is where it's going to lead. I mean, is it going to lead to a complete breakout of the transatlantic cooperation, or is it going to be some sort of, you know, stalemate, maybe freezing of some cooperation, but without much long-term harm done? The problem also is that this is the Vance is an example and a proof that this is not just Trump. Sometimes people, liberals, have this wishful thinking that if only Trump, but now we will have a second generation that can be America for decades if Vance in 4 years succeeds Trump as president. Yes.
A lot of people are saying that Trump is not the root of the issue, but the symptom of an issue that's already brewing. And this actually brought us down two lines of thinking that I would like to enlist your help on, because the Polish foreign minister, Radosław Sikorski himself, actually stated not long ago that the Trump administration doesn't necessarily have to mean the end of support for Ukraine, and he's been in talks with the Trump team, and he says that in some of his close allies, there's actually still a possibility of not just like preventing the aid from being cut off, but the possibility of increased aid. Do you agree with the foreign minister that maybe Trump term might not mean the reduced support for NATO?
I don't agree with this statement, but I'm very glad that he's making it, because, as I said, somebody needs to work with these guys. And you obviously know that a big argument for the support of Mark Rutte as the new Secretary General of NATO was that he has a working relation. He has a story of some respect from Trump.
The Trump whisperer.
Yeah, the Trump whisperer, yes. And I think Radek Sikorski can be another Trump whisperer. He has been a traditionally conservative politician who moved more to the liberal center, but has a lot of connections on the right side of the American political scene. And I think Poland is taking the presidency now of the European Union, now made famous. This is a kind of a very technical role, but now Viktor Orban is making it famous, making it great again. Yes, EU presidency, and Poland takes over on January 1st from Hungary. Just as the potential turn of American administrations. And I think Radek Sikorski can be an important player here, and maybe it's good that he didn't go to the European Commission to get a bureaucratic job, but will be one of the important foreign affairs ministers of a major country, the biggest per capita spender in NATO now that Poland is, to kind of, you know, patch things with this new, very radical administration in Washington, D.C. I think there is no other way. We need to work with Americans, whoever is in power. It's going to be very challenging, but I think especially with the way Trump operates, to have the right messenger to develop this personal rapport is very important. I think Rutte and Radek Sikorski may be the best that kind of liberals have to counter Viktor Orban.
Right. This actually answers the other question that I was about to ask, whether you think there's a politician in Poland that is best positioned to maintain like effective dialogue with Trump, and maybe the foreign minister is someone where we're looking at.
Absolutely, and because there will be this outside influence of Orban in this game. I always commented, wherever I commented on Hungarian politics and its influence on the EU, was that the Orban's international position is mostly a show for domestic reasons. And that has been true until now for 14 years since he's in power. I mean, we look at the current composition of the European Parliament. Orban has no influence whatsoever. Actually, his opponent, Peter Magyar, whose party was just admitted to the European People's Party, has now arguably more influence than Orban. Right. But for the first time in Orban's career, that can change on January 20th, 2025. If Trump comes to power, Orban can finally mean something in international relations. And Europe is not going to and shouldn't stay idle and look at this, authoritarian leader of a tiny nation fully dependent on European economic aid.
Perhaps Poland can be a balance to that dialogue.
Yeah, you read my mind. Yes.
Thank you so much, sir. Well, we had to wrap this up. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your input and insight, and thanks again for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Meanwhile, this concludes our World Talks, but for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.